Hello everybody, this is Odd Top Entertainment bringing you another video, and I've got something really cool to show you. This is a Gladiator NXT. It's made by VKB. It's really just a great all-around stick, but it has one thing that I've never been a fan of, and that is this dual stage trigger. The way it works is a half press will activate the primary trigger, and a full press will activate the primary and the secondary trigger. In games like DCS, you can have the first stage be to spin your barrels up, and then the second stage is to actuate the firing mechanism. I play Star Citizen, and in Star Citizen, what players will typically do is they'll set the first stage to be their energy weapons, and then they'll set the second stage to be their ballistic weapons. And that works, but the problem that you run into is as long as you're holding down that full trigger press, the energy weapons are still activated, which means that they're not recharging at the rate that they could be. And depending on the different patch cycles of Star Citizen, that has either meant that they're not recharging at all, or they're now firing at a much slower rate constantly. So I've come up with something else.
A significant portion of this project was developed live on stream. Besides providing all the footage I could ever need for time lapses, this is part of an initiative of mine to make engineering feel more accessible by breaking down the engineering process and doing it live with my audience. We also play games and do a whole host of other things live as well, so whatever your fancy, you'll probably find it with the live streams. I've also made a special effort to make these streams as convenient as possible. So whether it's YouTube, Twitch, or Rumble, you have a landing page to hang out with me and learn some engineering along the way. I also want to shout out our channel members. Your support directly helps me create more content and pay the bills. If you have the means to do so, your financial support is greatly appreciated. Orbital Bombardiers and up will also get mentions in each and every video and stream I put up, as well as a number of other benefits, with more to be added as the channel grows. Thank you.
This is still a Gladiator NXT, but this has the special trigger mod that we are going to be talking about today. And it still has the functionality where a half press activates the primary trigger and a full press activates the secondary trigger. But now we have a trigger bypass where by pressing this bottom lever, we can activate only the secondary trigger if we so choose. That means that I now have access to my energy weapons and my ballistics and my energy and ballistics at the same time, all with minor movements to my finger. The way that it works is pretty simple, and it's entirely reversible from the main hardware that comes on the Gladiator NXT. We use a custom two-part trigger mechanism that essentially has a piece that can reach around the primary mechanism and press that secondary trigger button, whilst retaining the ability to press the normal primary button as in the original design. So we retain the original functionality and add on to it by now having the ability to selectively use only the secondary trigger without activating this primary switch. If I take this guy out of here, I can show you a bit more about how it works. And we have a small torsion spring that you don't want to lose. And then this guy just rocks out, and there's another spring you don't want to lose. This is a normal compression spring. And this is actually what presses the primary trigger. When this spring is compressed, it creates enough force to actually depress the button itself, and then the secondary trigger is always activated with physical contact from the original trigger mechanism. In ours, this has been modified to allow the stages to move separately using a spring from a ballpoint pen as a secondary pivot mechanism. So when not depressed, the spring holds it in the open position, but it's a weaker spring, so you can depress it all the way and activate the secondary trigger without activating the primary trigger. If we compare that to the original trigger piece, you can see that this is one solid rigid piece, and a lot of the same features have been carried over. It's the same overall size. Obviously it needs to fit the joystick, right? The locating pin for the primary trigger spring is in the same spot, and it has sufficient clearance to get around the geometry inside the casing. Now, unfortunately for this stick, this one is not the one I plan to use, so it's going to be reassembled in its former glory, and I will be returning it back to its storage bin where it will await future experiments, because I want to use this mod on my actual sticks. But this is a great way to show that this mod is completely reversible. Just like that, we've returned the normal expected functionality to the VKB Gladiator. Now, I'm sure VKB probably has their own opinions, but if I were in charge, I would say that this probably would not void your warranty as long as you can bury your tracks. But I am not a legal expert, and you should not take this as legal advice. Before I install this trigger mod into my joysticks, I want to do a little bit of post-processing to these trigger pieces to make sure that they're going to feel nice against my skin and have good performance. Even though this was done with a resin printer and it does have exceptional detail, there is still a bit of a tacky feeling to it. And we're going to take care of that with some 320 grit sandpaper. And it really does not take a whole lot of work. Let me grab this guy's partner for the other stick. The sanded one is on the, what is that, the left of the screen? Anyways, you can pretty easily see it. The shiny one is the one that hasn't been sanded yet. We've completely taken away that shiny texture, and this is now going to ride much more smoothly inside the primary trigger. So I'm just going to repeat that treatment on all the main surfaces of the trigger assembly so that I don't have any of that tacky texture when I'm pulling on the trigger and I get a nice smooth operation. And I'm just applying very light pressure. We're not really trying to remove material, we're just trying to smooth out what's there. As with any sanding project, it's a good idea to alternate directions and change directions so that you don't wear any strange patterns into your surfaces. And I'm just going until I see those last bits of sheen disappear from this surface. Oh, I guess this is 160 grit, not 320. I've sanded all these parts so that they have a nice satin finish, and now they ride together pretty smooth. Quite happy with that, actually. Nice and quiet. That tacky feeling is gone, and I think that we're gonna get pretty good performance out of these parts. The next thing we need to do is we need to make some custom springs. Now, I happen to have a stockpile of pens thanks to work, so we're going to make this from a ballpoint pen spring. So here is a full-size spring, and we're just going to use our wire clippers to trim that to shape. So each one is going to be just under half a spring length. There we go, something like that. Now I'm not going to bother cutting out a second one because I already have one, and I only need two because I've got two hands. Now we're going to show the assembly process into the Gladiator NXT Evo. I cheated a little bit and I already took out one of the base screws. I'm sorry, you can rant about it in the comment section. This is the left stick on my configuration, which is why it has the omnithrottle, which I don't know, I'm not actually totally sold on. But just like the older version, this has the exact same base plate. So we undo these four silver screws across the bottom, set them aside where hopefully I won't lose them. And when we take the base plate off, we'll see a mechanism very similar to what we saw in the previous edition of the Gladiator. This does have the new dry clutches installed, which you can adjust with these red grommet marked sections. If you stick a hex key in there, you can increase the tension and increase the damping force that is exerted on the stick for reset. But I've got these tuned the way I like them, so I'm not gonna bother with that. You can tell these sticks haven't been worked on nearly as much as the other ones because these screws are actually quite tight. Be sure to undo your JST connector, and you're supposed to press down that little lever to make it pop out. You shouldn't be applying a whole lot of force to it. And carefully, we're going to pull that out of the base. It's dawning on me though, I'm not sure if I had to actually take it out of the base or not, because I just need to get to these screws on the side of the stick, which might mean I can do the right stick in place. But this makes it easier for you guys to see. Pushing the omnithrottle off to the side, you can get to this last screw. This should just pop off. And I think at this point it's quite apparent I should have totally been able to do this without taking the base off. So I will try to remember to put an annotation on screen so that other people don't make that same mistake. We'll say that I did it again to make it easier for you guys to see. But first step to removing the old trigger is to take out this torsion spring, which is really stuck in there. There we go. And then you just want to ease it off that pin that it rotates on. Make sure you don't lose that spring. Now we take our custom pieces, of which there are 4, 2 pairs of 2, and you need to make sure that you're getting the correct sides. So the way to identify that is the exterior or primary pin or primary trigger piece will have the nubbin for the torsion spring pointing up towards you when you have it disassembled like this. So we grab the matching primary trigger piece, and the secondary trigger piece will be the one that makes full contact along the exterior side of the trigger. So the same side that has the nubbin, you should see no gap here. The little gap should be on the other side of the trigger. So for example, this would be incorrect. This will make it too thick when you go to mount it. So having the correct pieces together, we'll have this and this piece touching. Now, the way that I've found is the easiest to do this. You take your ballpoint pen spring and the section that has been compressed to form a flat end, we're going to shove that into the hole on the secondary trigger piece. And ideally, you position it so that the sharp end of the spring just comes over the top. And then on this piece, there is a small indexing hole, and we're going to try and get it so that that little sharp end grabs onto the top of that indexing hole to hold the trigger into position, just like that. Then you're going to slide it partway on to the trigger, and you're going to do whatever you have to get this spring into position. Now, with it disassembled like this, this is the opportunity we have to make sure that everything is working correctly. So we should be able to pull the secondary trigger without activating the primary trigger. And we should be able to activate the primary trigger without activating the secondary trigger. And then we should be able to give it a full pull to activate both. So as long as those 3 criteria are met, you're good to reassemble it. I would test it again after adding the torsion spring. So with the torsion spring installed, I'm going to once again validate that everything is working as I expect it to, and it does. So I am ready to reassemble this. Now VKB is actually really nice in the fact that they make it so that these screws that hold the shell together are actually going into brass heat set inserts on the other side of the shell. Brass tends to be a softer metal though, and you can still strip it. So it doesn't need to be gorilla tight. It just needs to be tight enough that it doesn't come apart. And that, my friends, is feeling pretty good. And let me tell you, I cannot stress enough how careful you need to be with these thin wires. Do not put any pressure on them. They will break very easily. A VKB actually includes a piece of heat shrink tubing that they call I think they call it the cable insertion tool. By all means, use that. You do not want to crimp these wires. But I have learned from my painful mistakes how to use the incorrect method correctly. So I am more successful here than I deserve to be. Oh, and then we also just discovered, right, that you don't actually need to take the base off. All right. And just like that, we've got our reassembled left omnithrottle. I'm going to put this back onto its chair mount, and then I'm going to do the same exact surgery to the right stick, except I'm not going to take it out of the base because turns out you don't need to. Who'd have thought? Once I'm back, hopefully we'll be doing some demonstration in game to show some of the functionality. All right. Hello, everybody. So, let's see. Where did I put the old pieces? This is the trigger button that comes by default on these joysticks. And the way that it works is it has a spring attached to the back that when you bring it back halfway, it presses the primary trigger button. And when you give it a full press, this paddle section presses, mechanically depresses the secondary trigger button. I wanted to be able to access both triggers at the same time,
while keeping that half and full pull functionality, which led to this guy. So if I switch into SCM mode, I currently have the secondary trigger set up to do a scan ping. So I can do my ping, and then the primary trigger, let's see, I'll show it this way, fires the weapons. So I can still fire the weapons and then do a ping, or I can just fire the weapons or just do a ping. And it's a very subtle finger movement to be able to access both of those options. So I am very, very proud of that. And between this flip trigger in front of my finger and the 2 triggers underneath my index, I now have 4 buttons easily accessible to the index finger. And that's on both joysticks. The video had a rather abrupt ending, and so to give it a little bit of a more gentle let-off, I just want to talk about my experience during this project. I had a lot of fun coming up with this. It's always great to come up with an idea and then see it actually make your life better. Now, is this curing cancer, solving world hunger? No, but it does make my enjoyment of a video game just a little bit nicer. I think that if you have a VKB joystick, or any joystick for that matter, you'll probably want to do a modification like this to get that dual functionality into the trigger system. I don't have Virpils myself, but I would love to be able to work on making the same modification available. So Virpil, if you're watching, send me over a pair. And if you have any other project ideas, post them in the comments below. I'm always open to taking on more projects, and I want to make things that are relevant to you. So if you have a need, let's see if we can fix it. But until next time, this is Odd Job Entertainment, signing off.